All right. Good evening, colleagues and citizens. Welcome to the August 10, 2016 Capital Improvement Program and Finance Audit and Budget Committee meeting of the Prince George's County Board of Education. As always, before we begin, just a reminder to please turn off your electronic devices or put them on vibrate so they will not interfere with the mics and the taping of the meeting. Ms. Berkeley, would you please start us off by calling the roll?
Good evening, board members. Dr. Anderson, Ms. Boston, Mr. Burrows, Ms. Epps, Ms. Eubanks, Ms. Hernandez, Ms. Jacobs, Ms. Quinteros-Grady.
Aye.
Ms. Roche, Mr. Valentine, Mr. Wallace,
Present.
Ms. Williams, Dr. Eubanks.
Present. All right, colleagues, agenda items for this CIP FAB committee meeting are listed and also available on board docs. Any questions on the agenda before we get started? Seeing none, we will move on to, we don't have any public comment this evening, and we're not discussing any FAB items, so I'm going to yield the floor to Dr. Wesley Watts, pardon me, sir, right, to end the administration for an overview of CIP discussion, item 3.1.
Good evening. This evening we will have a presentation by Ms. Sarah Woodhead to discuss the proposed fiscal year 2018 through fiscal year 2023 capital improvement program. In the presentation you'll see some accomplishments from this year, talk about the Educational Facilities Master Plan, the 6-year plan, status of FY17 requests, and the FY18 capital budget request. And Sarah?
Thank you, and good evening, board members. I'd like to take a moment to introduce the staff who are here, because the capital improvement plan is truly a collaborative effort, and we're very pleased to be bringing it forward to you tonight. And all seated to my left, I'll start by introducing Mark Fawcett, who's the Assistant Superintendent for the Division of Supporting Services, newly on board, but already very supportive of what we're trying to do. Sam Stefanelli, who is the Director of Building Services, and his department is integrally involved in the development of the capital improvement program. A.J. Rawat and Elizabeth Chason, who are two planners with our department and really did a lot of the work of pulling this together. Lucian Coleman, who is our fiscal analyst, and he's also our acting capital improvement program officer. And Shayla Taylor, who is our program coordinator and will also be our acting director. So I'd like to say thank you for all your work in bringing us here today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shayla to walk us through the past year completed and ongoing projects.
All right. So a big part of our accomplishment is the projects we managed to complete, start, or are currently ongoing from the last fiscal year. This is actually a rendering of Fairmont Heights at the bottom.
Hello.
So, yeah, it's not quite there yet.
Hello. I'm just going to ask that you get a little closer to the mic for us.
A little tall. I'll try to. A little taller than Sarah, just a little. Is that better?
Yeah, just kind of lean in. Sorry, we're
fine.
gonna get a button to raise the podium up for you tall folk for now.
I would not mind that. Okay, so I was just saying this at the bottom here is Fairmont Heights High School, but it is just a rendering. We are not quite that far along. The picture on the left, though, is steel erection that happened at Fairmont Heights. And we just met a gentleman a few minutes ago who's the chairman of the Legacy Committee, and he let us know that they're very excited about their ribbon cutting, but it is not until 2017. Other projects completed in the last fiscal year include Henry Ferguson at Accokeek. There's a new barbering and cosmetology lab at Bladensburg High School. And there's been 5 storefront exterior door window replacement projects. And this is a project picture at Bladensburg, the workstations. Other projects completed include a good number of systemic improvements, which include security, athletics, code compliance projects. And then you've got pictures of one of the playgrounds, a turf field, and one of the mechanical improvements. Project underway include Fairmont Heights High School again, which is opening in 2017, as is Glen Arden Woods Elementary School modernization. Eugene Burroughs, it says 2017. We apologize, it's actually opening in 2016, along with several SSR projects at various high schools, and again, many systemic replacement projects.
Bringing Elizabeth Chase on up to talk about planning accomplishments.
You didn't want to do the management accomplishments? Yeah, let's see, both of these are you, if you want to do them.
Okay, all right. Well, we're playing it by ear a little bit here. We have had a lot of planning accomplishments over the last year, and most notable among those accomplishments is the completion of the 20-year Educational Facility Master Plan for FY17 and beyond, and that was approved by the school board this past spring, and that really is a major underpinning for our capital improvement plan. We also completed a modernization master plan study for William Schmidt, and 2 middle school sites have been selected. Highlighting some of the management accomplishments, we've continued to have community outreach with fall and spring meetings over the last several years. We have finally been successful in hiring a senior mechanical engineer, which did take some work and some commitment from the school system, and makes a big difference to us, because in our existing buildings, the systems that are most at risk are old heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems. And our senior mechanical engineer also serves as a bridge between the capital program and the building services department. So we've already got a lot of traction out of that. We're improving our performance on scheduling by providing training on schedule management and training on estimating. We're developing a program-wide tracking system for change orders by project and by type. And we are pleased to report that for projects that were completed in the previous 12 months, we've been coming in well under industry standard at less than 1% as a percentage of the base contract for change orders. So that's a very good record. And one of our goals is to continue to improve our timeline for closing out projects, and we made progress on that over the last year.
And the one on, well, is the 0.29 hours, or is that industry standard? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand what that is.
Okay, so our performance is 0.29%. Industry standard, people usually look at about 4%, maybe 3 to 5%, we could say, as a good record for change orders. So we're well below that.
Good evening. So as we've shown this pyramid many times to illustrate that the comprehensive maintenance plan really is the baseline for all of the projects, the vision that goes into the educational facility master plan that then informs the capital improvement plan and becomes capital projects in the CIP eventually. So you'll note that in the recently approved EFMP Educational Facility Master Plan, there are 3 cycles of modernization projects over the next 20 years. Each one represents approximately 6 years. Cycle 3 is approximately 8 years because it takes a little longer to finish these multi-year projects. And they're about $3 billion per cycle. So we're really emphasizing cycle 1 of the CIP this year. 17 through, we're into 23, so we're just kind of crossing over into the beginnings of cycle 2. And in section 4 of the Educational Facility Master Plan, there is a nice summary of this kind of bigger vision, right, with all of the different cycles, and there are actually tables of the different projects, all of the different schools by cycle in section 4 of the Educational Facility Master Plan. So the strategic plan, we ramp up basically to full or limited modernization of all of these older schools across the county over these 3 cycles. Beginning in cycle 1, we have about 27 schools, and we're addressing overutilization first. We do have some new schools as a result of that, but we are trying to balance that with existing school modernizations at the same time. We are prioritizing middle schools, mainly because when you read through the Educational Facility Master Plan, you'll see that one of the findings was that the condition of our middle schools, it was something we needed to work on. We've done a lot of work on the high schools, but less so on the middle schools over the last few years. So we address underutilization in the master plan through planning studies. And again, section 4 has a good kind of timeline illustration on the next 9 different studies that we plan to do over the next 6 years. This is to end up with more efficient operations, which are really essential to obtain state funding. We need to balance enrollment between the schools to get state funding. Adjacent schools are pretty critical in getting funding for a school project. So in this CIP, you'll see over the next 6 years that we have about 13 elementary schools, 10 middle, 3 high, 1 specialty school, an early childhood center, the 5 new schools, and then 1 student instructional center, William Schmidt, which is a campus, not really a school, but all students in the county in 5th grade participate in this. And you'll see that just this small listing of schools here, and again, if you want the full listing, it's in section 4, the EFMP. You'll see that there's a balance of schools in the south, the central area, and in the northern area. Section 4 of the Educational Facility Master Plan that we presented in June, and I know you all have a copy of that, right? Okay. And it's on the web, at your fingertips.
Good evening, everyone. Currently, of course, we're in fiscal year 2017, and of course, the good news is that the budget, of course, has been loaded. Okay. What you have before you is an approved and requested spending, an approved and requested trending chart that actually goes back to fiscal year 2012. And if you look at the columns, you will see that there's a trend. We started off in 2012. You can see there was a request for about $55 million from the state. If you look at the approved amount, it's in the following column. And it's been pretty constant, more or less. And if you look at the county, going back 5 years, you will see that we requested about 43 million. Excuse me, we requested about 49 million, and we received 43 million. But if you look at it through 2017, you can see that number pretty much double. Okay, some of the highlights that's in the current fiscal year budget: state funding approved for 65 systemic projects, ranging in cost from $129,000 to nearly $3 million. Local funding for many more. State approval of partial construction for funding for limited renovation at C. Elizabeth Reed and Bowie Annex are still pending. This is part of the EGRC funding that we anticipate will probably come online this fiscal year, hopefully. Funding not yet approved for the Stephen Decatur Middle School and William Schmidt Education Center renovations. However, we're still moving forward with the planning phases of these projects. State planning approved for William Wirt Middle School replacement is also included as one of the highlights in the current fiscal year budget. So, thank you.
Okay. So looking at the fiscal year 18 request, which is what we're bringing before the board for consideration now and through September, the highest priorities are on projects that are already approved and already underway, requesting funding that's needed to complete the projects. And so you see Fairmont Heights at the top with additional funding on the county side. The state funding has already been approved to the maximum that the state will provide for. Tulip Grove, we have a note there that says that we may adjust based on the actual contracted amount. We are in the bidding phase for the project, and so between now and when we ask the board for final approval on the budget, we may adjust that number. The next two projects, well, Stephen Decatur is in design, so we're looking for funding for that project. The next two, C. Elizabeth Reed and Bowie Annex, these numbers may also be adjusted because the state is still reviewing our request for EGRC enrollment growth and relocatable classroom funding for those projects, and they canceled their meeting in the summer when they were going to look at it, so it's deferred to their September meeting. So we're keeping an eye on that, and we may make adjustments based on that. William Wirt and William Schmidt were in the previous CIPs, and so we're continuing to work to develop those projects. Okay. Next, as priorities 7 and 8, you see the two new middle schools. They were also in the previous CIP, and we are requesting local planning money so that we can undertake the design. Priority number 9 is the Suitland High School complex, and we're requesting money for design for that as well, and that project will start with a feasibility study to look at options to deliver the program. We also have the new international school at Langley Park, and then again, following through the bottom of this slide, you can see these are also projects that emerged from the master plan support project and the subsequent educational facility master plan. So the total for new schools and renovations is, the total request is $110,379,898. Most of that funding is in county requests because this year is heavy on the planning. Next year it would be heavier on the construction end of the spectrum. So moving from the major projects to the systemic projects, we did introduce this slide before, but we think it's an important image. We like to reinforce within our organization that the capital program is supporting building services, and so the bottom of our pyramid, the baseline, is the comprehensive maintenance plan that you'll be looking at later on this fall. And that serves as the basis to make sure that the capital plan is aligned with the needs in the schools as assessed by the Department of Building Services. So for FY18, we're continuing with a robust request for systemic projects, and there are several categories that are eligible for state funding. Those are building envelope improvements. Envelope meaning the outside protective surface of the building, windows, doors, some cases roofs. We're also looking at central HVAC systems, and we've kind of upgraded our notion of HVAC so that in the past you might have seen pipe replacements or small pieces and parts replacements. We are now looking at bringing our buildings up to code for HVAC and doing more significant projects so that as we're working on the mechanical heating, ventilating, and cooling system for a school, we're really making a significant improvement. And so for some of those projects, the cost estimates have gone up, and that is reflected here, but they are much more holistic, comprehensive projects, and they'll better serve the school system, and they'll be more durable investments. We also have several categories of projects that are only eligible for local funding from the county: parking lots, driveways, playgrounds, site work, miscellaneous interior improvements, code corrections, security upgrades, site acquisitions. QZAB are a partnership, and we'll be looking out for those if that emerges later in the year. Kitchens, transportation, and planning funding are only funded by the county. Aging Schools program, currently the state does not have the program in place for this year, but it may be something that will emerge. So we are ready with projects that will be scoped and ready to go if that funding becomes available. The attachment that I handed out lists all the projects in more detail, and we will make sure that gets uploaded to the web as well. In terms of next steps, we have the presentation tonight. Then this comes back to the school board as a first reader on August 25th. There's a public hearing scheduled for September 15th, the second reader on September 22nd, and from there it will go through the county and state review and approval process. And as I said, we did have community meetings in the spring. We have met throughout the summer with various groups, but we've also decided, based on our recent experience, that it's good to keep all the lines of communication open. So we're setting up a special email address where the public can submit comments on the CIP, so that in addition to the hearing, there's another opportunity to send in your thoughts. So that address is cip@pgcps.org. And so that's the presentation. Any questions?
That's a joke, right? All right, let's get things started. I had Mr. Wallace, because he buzzed in nice and early, followed by Ms. Boston and Dr. Anderson and Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the administration for the great presentation. I am delighted to see that Suitland High School is top 10 priority. This has been a ongoing struggle for the Suitland community for a long time, dating back to when I was in the school system as a student. But my question would be, what does it take, or what needs to happen to see Suitland go further or higher up on the state priority list? The community has emailed me constantly about they want a new facility, not a renovated one. While I know the geographical limits of Suitland kind of limit that, I want to know what it takes to see this priority number go up. And in the professional recommendation from the administration, is it likely that we'll see a renovation over a replacement?
So as you can see, that our request calls for a renovation / replacement, and that's because the state requires us to do a study called a feasibility study anytime we contemplate replacing more than 50% of a school, and we would do that project under state guidelines and with the participation of the community, and assess options, everything from a brand new school to an attempt to try to save as much of the building as possible to something in between. And so we're working on acquiring services to undertake that study. We're also working on designing the program for the school, and that will be an important underpinning for the process. And based on that, we will determine, we'll formulate a recommendation. The feasibility study would come to the school board, and then it would be sent to the state for evaluation. So there's a very scripted process to make the determination about how to proceed. We would, however, anticipate that it would be a significant project with a like new result regardless of which avenue was chosen. But that will be done in consultation with the board. In terms of bringing it up to a higher priority, you can see that most of the schools that are a higher priority are there because they were in the previous capital plan and work has already begun on them. You know, and that doesn't mean they couldn't be changed around, but we do like to kind of work through our commitments and keep those going before we bring in a new project. But so that was our rationale for why it is where it is. And number 10 is pretty high up on the list.
Yeah.
In terms of new initiatives.
I would agree. Thank you. And my final question, Mr. Chair, in regards to Drew Freeman, and I think this is on the 3rd page under systemic improvements or projects. Can you just explain what the DDC control upgrade is? And does that in any way relate to some of the concerns that I've heard? And, you know, we've had constituents testify in regards to the television lab at Drew Freeman Academy that is not conducive to the deaf and hard of hearing program because the wiring, I met with the principal and she said the wiring is just outdated and they just cannot use the TV lab. And it's for those students in the deaf and hard of hearing program, they cannot see the morning announcements. So just explain to me what that acronym is and if that does relate to some of the concerns.
It does not. That relates to direct digital controls, which is more, again, about the HVAC. But the issue on hearing impaired is an ADA issue, and we do have a different project type. We can look into that because that's an important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Ms. Boston.
I do know that Dr. Anderson did buzz in before me, so I'm going to let her go first, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. And
Not only do I not mind, please, it was my computer's blocked here, and I read from left to right.
I understand. I understand. Ms. Woodhead, I want to thank you for your presentation, always. I have a question, though, about the 2 new middle schools that we approved of last year. Have we identified the feeder schools for them?
We identified the sites for the 2 new middle schools, and we did identify generally what the adjacent schools are. In terms of feeder schools, as I understand it, and maybe others can correct me, but finalizing the attendance boundaries for the school will happen a little further along in the process. And that's basically the method for determining feeder schools.
So those 2 schools are on slide 19, I think, or slide 20. I was a little slow in writing down the slide. Oops. And the reason I ask is slide
there.
19.
Next one. Okay. At the top.
Yeah. At the top.
Yes.
Okay. So, and they're, okay. I thought that we approved of them in District 3. They were one in, because I was wondering about William Wirt. I thought that William Wirt was one of the 2 schools, at least identified as a, I don't want to say feeder, but in that neighborhood.
So this is where that summary in the EFMP is really useful, Section 4, because it explains how many seats we're missing in the northern area. And the northern area is like District 1, 2, 3, 4, and it begins to sort of bleed over into the Kenmore area, which is almost 5. They all affect each other. There's a rippling effect there. And so the new Adelphi area middle school will primarily affect Buck Lodge and Nicholas Orem, but there will probably be some rippling effect into MLK, right, and Hyattsville as well. The second one, the Glen Ridge area middle school, is going to affect Kenmore, Golson, Charles Carroll. William Wirt is almost just going to affect William Wirt because it's going to go from 800 seats to 1,200 seats, and we actually are missing 800 seats at that school. projected, right? So there's going to have to be a reboundary, and some of those children will end up going to Glenridge. And then Kenmore, when that comes online, that will take care of the rest of the students who didn't fit into Glenridge and that border.
Yeah,
I hope that helps.
yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Yeah, great.
Well, first, Ms. Woodhead, I want to say that I heard that you're leaving us.
Oh, no.
And I'm very sad to hear that. I really want to thank you for the time you spent with Prince George's County and the work that you've done. And we wish you luck on your new professional journey, whatever that may be. So I just wanted to say that first.
Thank you so much.
Didn't know that.
I had a couple.
I wasn't planning on being so nice when it was my turn, because I'm bitter and mad about it.
I am too, but you know. I had a couple of questions. I noticed that on, forgot what slide, let me see, what slide this was. I'm ready to speak about Walker Mill, the renovations at Walker Mill. I do know that we've had a request in for a while for some renovations on the gym or the multi-purpose room, whatever they call it. I've been there numerous times, and I know the bleachers are terrible, the floor is terrible, but I didn't see anything listed for the next, look like 3 or 4 years on this report, other than the elevator at Walker Mill for renovations. Can you give me, I want to understand how that renovation got knocked off of the list altogether.
Okay. Sure, thank you. And thank you, Beth, for bringing up the data for the response. So Walker Mill is slated for a major project in Cycle 1, beginning in fiscal year 20. And so where that is occurring, then we're trying not to invest too much additional funding in the building, because whatever we invest between now and then will be deducted from the state's budget when it comes time to do the modernization at the school.
I understand that, but if the, you know, if it's still being used, if our students are still using that gymnasium and the bleachers are not, or the floor is not properly maintained, or is it, you know, 4 years, you're talking about 2020, right? That's still a long time, and it's just going to deteriorate even more.
Right. So we've been working closely with building services on all of those critical systems at schools that are within the near term on the modernization program, so that we are trying to take care of critical issues, and that's something we can talk about further. Is there a stopgap or something we can do to help make sure that it's in usable condition in the interim?
Safe for our kids.
Right.
Yes. One of my colleague had a question, I know she had to leave, about whether or not we're building a new international school in Langley Park, or is this renovation to Langley Park for the international school?
We're recommending a new school in Langley Park, because the existing elementary school that's right there on the same grounds that we're planning on recommending to the board, we haven't brought that to you yet, is over capacity as well, so there's not space there to do that.
So on item 10 on this sheet that you gave us right here, the new international school at Langley Park, and it doesn't look like there's enough money to build a school, but anyhow, is this renovations to Langley Park?
No, it's referring to Langley Park as the neighborhood, not as the name of a school. So we can look at finding we'll describe that better going forwards, because you're not the first person who thought that was what was intended here. We can make that correction. And the $2.4 million is for local planning. That will help us start the design work once the site is approved. So it isn't the total budget for the project.
I think that's what made it a little confusing, because we're looking at the totals like, I know it costs more than that to build a school.
We can clarify that. We can say in Langley Park area, and then it's clear we're talking about the neighborhood and not the existing school.
And this is just initial funding for planning, not,
Correct.
not the actual cost to build? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for clearing that. Thank you.
Ms. Williams?
Thank you. My first comment goes to slide 18, where we talk about where the state priority shows NA, where we're talking about the new high schools, site acquisition.
Yes.
And just looking at just data from past, when you create new schools on new land, it appears that what happens is we tend to cannibalize the schools around the community that are adjacent to that new school on new land. I would just be very cautious, or just try to plan this out so that it doesn't happen, where you will basically cannibalize the schools that are around, the high schools that are around that area, and therefore you create underutilization in those communities. I think that we were very successful with how we did it at Oxon Hill, where we built the schools on the property. It may have been a little, logistical nightmare on occasion because of the construction and the school being open during that time, but you're pulling from a community that already exists. You don't lose the history of that school, even though it's not in the same building. I would strongly suggest and encourage that we look to, if we're looking at school replacement or building new schools, we build it on existing property that we have. And one great benefit of that is that we're not talking about acquiring new land. Mm-hmm. So that's just a comment on that as we move forward. I had a question about where we stand with the second shift for building services that we approved. How are we doing with building up that population or those personnel?
That was not in the final budget reconciliation for that second.
I thought we had a few positions. I thought we had just a few positions in there or something related to the second shift.
No, we have been able to realign some positions to start a second shift, but there was nothing in this year's budget.
How are we doing with that? Are we moving some people around? Have we started having a second shift in operation?
We currently have 5 positions in our second shift, and we're beginning to use those for preventative maintenance, which was what that was slated for. Okay, great. I knew there was something that had to do with second shift. Looking at the schedule that we have between now and September, it's the second to last slide. Are we having any meetings in the community between now and September? Will we be having those?
So there are some meetings that have been scheduled by others that we've been asked to attend that staff are planning to attend, but we don't have a separate slate of community meetings. There's really not enough time once school starts and trying to schedule them within this timeline. Our deadline, unfortunately, is really mandated by the state schedule for submission of the CIP and the county process as well. So, we're considering the meetings that occurred in the spring and that we've been having off and on around the calendar year to have been very informational and very important to us. So at this point, we don't have a dedicated round of public meetings scheduled for this CIP.
So the next community meetings that we'll be having possibly in the spring would be for FY19. Comments from the community for creating FY19.
Yes.
Okay. And my last question is, what is QZAB?
Qualified Zone Academy bonds, which is a way of underwriting the funding for schoolwork that is available from time to time, and whenever it is we've been able to take advantage of it. We've done a lot of technology projects, security projects, food service projects with QZAB. There's some restrictions on where the money can be spent, and you have to have partnerships and so on. But we'll use any funding that comes our way to maximum effect.
Okay. Well, one more last question. When you're talking about your facility work, what is it called? County-funded facilities?
Yes.
And you have a line item for parking lots and driveways. How could a school be selected to use part of that money for repairs to their parking lot and driveways at their school? What is the process for that?
So we have the recommendations and the priority order for that work coming through building services, and they're out walking the parking lots, and they also coordinate with the safety office because sometimes we have safety issues out there. So we generally accept their recommendations for priority order for that, and that will be part of the comprehensive maintenance plan that is coming to you, so that should list out in priority order what their recommendations are.
Okay. And I really appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you.
You will be missed. And wherever you go, I know you will be very successful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your help.
We have Burrows, Eubanks, and Roach.
Hello. I just want to talk about what objective measurements did we use to determine which priorities would be in our top 14? So when the public sees the top 14, what do we point to and say, this is the reason? Because when I look at this list and I hear some of the comments from my colleagues about the conditions of the schools they represent, there are a lot of schools in my district that have the same issues, you know, the leaky roofs, the mold, and deplorable conditions as well, but they're not here. And so I realize, you know, when you have limited funds, you have to make difficult decisions, but what objective measurement or standard are we using so that the public is confident that we are making fair and equitable decisions?
So we rely to the best extent that we can on objective data so that we're being fair and equitable in the distribution of funding. If you look at the top school, Fairmont Heights, that was an existing school that had been slated originally for renovation and then for replacement because of its condition. The same with Tulip Grove and C. Elizabeth Regan, Bowie Annex, and Stephen Decatur. Those were found under the old Parsons project assessment to be in the worst condition, to have the worst facility condition index. Moving downward from there, the projects were identified in the master plan support project, and then that was further vetted and analyzed by school system staff and over 2 years of public meetings, and that took into account the facility condition index, but weighted for critical systems, the educational adequacy of the facilities, as well as the utilization of the facilities. So it was a broader look at the situation in the schools, and they provided us with recommendations in terms of the order for modernization or for new schools, and for the most part, we have followed that order.
Okay. So if we've, can I just get a copy of that? So I would love to see where schools like Crossland and Thurgood and Isaac Rardine would fall in that.
Yes, it is on our website. If you put in Master Plan Support Project or MPSP, or even better yet is really to look at the EFMP, the Educational Facility Master Plan, because that represents the vetting that we did of the consultant report and the recommendations that were brought to the board in the spring, in May. So these grew out of what was approved in the May Educational Facility Master Plan. And all of those documents are on the web.
Okay. And so if we follow the consultants and you do your vetting, what role or what is the purpose of having this public hearing? So if we largely follow a set of norms or procedures when it comes to making these decisions, if I'm a member of the public and I attend Crossland and I realize that Crossland or Thurgood or Isaac Ordine, if I perceive them to be in awful shape, especially Isaac Ordine, and I come to the hearing, what impact is that going to have on really anything? I mean, what's the point of having the hearing? This is what I'm
So
trying.
we have had a series of community meetings, as I said, typically 3 in the spring, 3 in the fall, but many, many other meetings in between where we had participation from all the communities, and they did impact the metrics that were used when we asked about critical systems and what's most important to keeping schools functioning and to quality of life for the people who study and teach in our schools, and that did help us to shape the outcome. We would still welcome people to come because we are going to produce an educational facility master plan every year. We're required to by state, but it's best practice anyway. We are going to produce a capital improvement plan every year, which is also required by the state, but is a best practice that we firmly believe in. And so this is an iterative process, and it's an ongoing dialogue. And I don't think there's any point where community input is not welcome. It is always welcome, and it can always have an impact.
Okay. I mean, you know, I understand it. I just think maybe the board needs to have a conversation about if members of the community are coming forward. So on one hand, if you have a community that's more vocal, are they being heard more than communities that are not? Well, obviously they're being heard more, but are they benefiting more than communities that are not? And then on the other hand, it's, are we adhering to these objective standards and holding to them to make the decision? So I guess I'll talk to you about, actually, I guess I didn't know you were leaving. Best wishes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service over the many, many years that you've been here. And tell your family members abroad I said hello.
Thank you so much.
I look, you know, tell them I said hi. But I guess whoever will be in your position, I just have these concerns. Because if I'm a member of the community and I see this list, and every concern that members of the board have raised also apply to me in my schools, but they're not here, it just...
So that's why we want to use objective data. And we needed everybody's input to help us shape the metrics and the weighting and some of the thinking about it. So that, for example, hearing from people when they testify, we heard an awful lot about the mechanical systems at our schools, the lack of heating, lack of cooling, or indoor air quality problems because of leaky pipes. And you'll see that that's heavily reflected in here, in that those schools with the most significant problems were rated higher for modernization, and that a lot of our systemic dollars are going into HVAC. So it's a process of ongoing communication, but you know, not a political process, except in that the voice of the people as it comes to us through the board is always valuable. But we didn't take a process where we moved schools around on the list because people complained. We really tried to look at the data because that's the best practice to develop this kind of plan and carry it forward and have some credibility and transparency and fairness, and that's what we looked at as our responsibility.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'll go and kind of have a couple of thoughts and a couple of questions, and it kind of backs up to what Mr. Burrows said I had done. I pulled up the Education Facilities Master Plan, and it's really helpful to look through it, but Mr. Burrows does remind me that when I look through it, even as difficult as it is for me, your answers that you gave to Mr. Burrows just now need to be in some kind of a clear brochure or some other kind of communication that we can share with the public that shows here are the 5 steps. You know, you basically wrote the brochure Dr. Woodhead, in just your responses right here, right? We go through, we went through this master support project, we do this education facilities master plan, we do this analysis, we have these meetings with communities, and we've had a step-by-step of how we got here and why we think it is a clear and objective and defensible process. I think having that would be real powerful, and I'd love to just have it myself as a cheat sheet to be able to explain when I go out in the community. That would be extremely helpful. The second thing that would be helpful, which could be harder, I think what I said was one of the easy ones. The second thing I'd just love to have is a single page. That's harder because now we're talking 204 pages. A single page on every school. This is what we found. This is where we are. These are the problems and challenges we have. This is where you are in the proverbial line. It might be, I know that's how, so that's just a thought. That's not, the first one was a suggestion because I think that's easy. That one, think about it, or think of another way in which we as a board can kind of have quick access to be able to say, when you know, well, what about my school? It's in so-and-so session, boom, okay, here you are, here's where you stand. That would be helpful. Now, by way of questions, and I'm also going to ask, because I thought of all this because one of the first schools that I thought about, and I looked up to see where it was, and I see that it's in Cycle 1, FY21, is High Point High School. But we know, the community high school, High Point High School, has been very vocal about the conditions of the school and where it is. And so if you don't know that and you look and you just kind of don't know any better and you pull this out, it looks in layman's that there are 57 higher priorities than High Point High School. Now, I know, 'cause it actually took me 2 years to figure out that that's not what this says. So somehow, number one, I want you to walk me through High Point High School as an example. So if I see High Point High School in FY21 in Cycle 1, what does that mean? And if I were to tell people that when you look at this, that means you should expect a new High Point High School if everything went well in X.
Right. So we would begin, High Point High School is the third of the comprehensive high schools in the order that was recommended to us and which we have followed in our EFMP.
Third in line for high schools?
It's the third in line for comprehensive high schools for major modernization.
That's great information right there.
So ahead of it are Suitland High School, Gwynn Park High School, and then it's High Point.
Okay.
And we've placed a high school in the CIP every other year because they're large, they're expensive projects. It's hard to do a proper job on a high school if we are trying to do too many things at once, and the funding isn't available to handle other priorities if we do that. So we would begin planning in 2021, and for a high school, we can do some advanced planning, but we would start in earnest asking for local planning approval in 2021, which means for a high school, it's typically 5 years before you're done with the project. So that would put it at 2026 or so. And some of that would depend on whether it's phased or not. Right. We did a feasibility study that called for a replacement school at High Point. We did check with the state if we change parameters, if we're building for a different capacity, or if a lot of time goes by in between, they may want us to redo that study. But we would do that before 2021 so that it wouldn't hold us up in terms of timeline.
All right, thank you. And that's the kind of information, again, if I'm now that you said that, I'm sure at some presentation you said that they were third on the list, but that's the kind of really easy access stuff it would really empower us to have in a nice, easy form. I see that they're writing notes over here. They've already written there. I can see them in the process. They're writing my brochure for me right now. I'm very excited about that. All right, one more money question. So if you look at on the last page of the handout that you send us, and this is where I try to understand how the money thing works. We're asking for FY 2018 for $78.8 million from the state and $229.4 million from the county. So my first question is, how much did we ask for in 2017 and how much did we get?
So let me go back to that slide.
I don't know if it's on the slide. No, because this is on the handout you gave me.
It's on slide 14.
Yes,
You
I
can
missed that. I was
see
trying to, right.
for FY17, we requested 62 million and we
We got
received
40,
40
right.
million.
Yeah, so about 60%.
Right. And as you know, there's a lot of discussion about funding school construction in the state, and this program at $8.5 billion over the 20 years is not a program that's funded at this point in
Right.
time. So we're still looking at approximately 100 million from the county, and as far as we know, something similar from the state for what we've received before, although all of that can be impacted by the commission that's now looking at school facilities and funding for capital improvements. So there are some question marks out there, and when we're talking to any school, High Point or any school, about what will happen in 2021, I always try to be careful to make sure people understand that this is our request, this is our adopted program.
Right.
It is not yet a funded program.
Right. So and in that process, if we're assuming we're, you know, if on an average day we get half of what we ask for, do we literally just go down? Does everything on here get half? I know the answer is kind of more common. Does everything on here get half? Do you keep going down list 1 through 20 till you run out of money? If you have half of what you get, how do you make some of this stuff work?
So it's not a question of half. I think right now, if you look at the history, it really is a question of around 140, give or take, a year. If history is right, it's half. All I'm saying is we don't double it. I think that the line that you would want to draw would be if nothing changes, if the funding principles stay the same, then it might be reasonable to expect around 140 million. Although the county is looking at its debt limits, it's not a certainty at all. So I think this is an important community conversation to have. It's an important conversation with the legislature. It's an important conversation for the state of Maryland to have. You know, we have billions in deferred maintenance, but our communities are not satisfied with just letting us fix a 1960 building so it still functions in a 1960 way. People want air conditioning, they want technology, they want new science labs, they want things that are appropriate for modern educational programs, and we agree with them, and that's what brings us to the $8.5 billion number. This year is not the toughest year because we're mostly looking at planning projects. The state won't approve local planning for projects that they don't think they can fund in the next year, the following year. So they will run down the list and hopefully give us A's, which means they've agreed to fund to a certain level, and then they'll turn those A's to B's where they say, well, this is an eligible project, but we haven't identified the funding to do it. So that will start to happen on this CIP unless there's a different approach to funding the program. And so we're very cognizant of where those limits are, but we're also committed to making a real change and taking a big step forward to improve the conditions at the schools.
Right, got it. So and when they do that, I'm just trying to understand. So they put A's and B's. So that mean that in some projects, if they went down and said, you know, Stephen Decatur gets a B, that just means no funding for that. But then they might give the, you know, Bowie an A, and they're funding for that. That's kind of how that works in the state level.
So they follow our priorities in general. At least that's been historically true, and things are changing, so things could change. But in the past, they will follow our planning priorities, and they will give projects, if it's of interest, they'll either A, B, C, or D. A is good to go, you're funded. B is the project is eligible, it meets all our requirements, but we can't commit ourselves to funding it yet or now. C means, from the state's point of view, they still have questions. They're not sure whether it's eligible or not. We have to do more work to convince them it's a worthy project that meets state guidelines. And D is something the state has declared not eligible. So in some of those cases, we can seek to do work on a county-funded only basis if it's a high priority for the school system. But we're working within that envelope of likely funding until something changes and that bottom line begins to shift.
All right, good. Thank you. Last question. Did I adequately grill you for your last board meeting? That was my goal. It's pretty easy. No, Dr. Woodhead and I, we figured out that we may have actually, her board meeting and my board meeting may have been the same board meeting 3 years ago. Thank you for 3 years of tremendous service. You will be missed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ms. Roach.
Thank you to you and your team for your presentation. I first wanted to just echo Dr. Eubanks' comments about just communications around this, a brochure, whatever it is. The couple community meetings I went to, I found that people just want to be heard and they want to understand why they are where they are, so the process. And I don't know if this is outside of our bounds as a school system, but to the extent we can encourage people to actually contact their state legislators and get involved. I heard some staff talk about it. You know, we've got to get together to do this. So my questions are around the compliance mandate projects. So with the work scheduled for this year around ADA compliance, will that get us fully compliant with ADA?
No.
No?
Unfortunately, no. We work under program compliance so that any student who needs access to any place in the building will find a way to make it happen, even if it means moving a classroom from the second floor to the first floor. The comprehensive modernization program will bring all schools up to complete compliance with all codes, including ADA, but we do ask the county every year for some funds to take care of ADA compliance issues as they arise.
So if, in your estimation, what % there are we right now?
I could research that, but I don't know it off the cuff.
Yeah, it doesn't really need to be researched. I'm just, you know, I understand it's also a direct correlation with the age of the buildings, and so just a general concern about access. The other question was around lead remediation. What does $200,000 get us?
So we have a series of projects where we're taking care of lead, and sometimes it might be pipes in the school. Sometimes it's the caulking around the windows. When we want to repaint, we need to take the lead out of the caulking. So it gets us a variety of corrective actions across the system where they're needed. And there is some similar work that's funded out of the operating budget, but the operating budget really can't support all of the work that's needed. So one of the things I like to point out about the compliance requirement or the compliance request, sometimes it gets underfunded because it's not designated for specific schools, but it really is an important asset for us to take care of issues that may emerge over the course of the year.
And I guess just with the news about lead in water in schools, are we concerned about that in our school system? Has there been research around that?
Sure. I'll ask Sam to answer that.
Yes, we have an office that studies that. We are testing all of our water. We began last year. We have a program, and where we do think we may have an issue, we provide bottled water. Like Sarah said, that's not enough funding to take care of most of the issues. We're forced to take care of most of the issues out of our operating budget, which requires Dr. Maxwell to come up with the funding. But we've been, our budget always has been very good about covering that for us. But we're working towards a goal. It's an issue with all our older facilities. It's with our windows and our piping, but we're staying on top of it.
Thank you.
And if I could just add, the state in the mid-2000s, early mid-2000s, they did a statewide check, as I recall, on lead in the schools. There were some concerns way back then in our state. I know this has been a recent topic in the national news, and there were places where, you know, we were required across the state to post signs that this is not potable water and those kind of things. And since that time, you know, districts have been working to remediate this. So, you know, I think your overarching question at the beginning was, are we facing that kind of situation? And we're not. We have a situation, but it's not that kind of situation. So.
Okay. Thanks.
But it is one of the reasons we're calling for modernization rather than just the Band-Aids, because a lot of those pipes are inside of walls, and it's very hard to just strategically go in and replace all the pipes in a school without really kind of wreaking havoc, and we'd rather do a thorough job and fix everything all at once when we need to do that. But of course, we can't do that in the near term, so we're balancing both strategies.
Thank you.
You all set, Ms. Roach?
That's it.
All right, thank you. Mr. Wallace, you had a follow-up?
Just quickly, Mr. Chair, I wanted to thank the administration for providing this email address. Please be on the lookout for several thousand people from Suitland, Maryland, in regards to Suitland High School and Drew Freeman Middle School. I know my colleagues received a lot of correspondence from one civic association, and they have been constantly on me, giving me updates of their needs. So I thank you for that. One quick question about Drew Freeman Middle School. I know it's not on the list. I think when we voted on that project, that plan, last school year I think it was fiscal year 2020, where we would get some fiscal feasibility study money. But would the timing of that be synced up with the opening of a renovated or redeveloped Suitland High School, so that whole one block complex would be open at the same time, where everything would just look totally brand new?
So what we're recommending, actually, Drew Freeman is in the plan for fiscal 18, so so it actually is up higher than you were remembering. But what we're calling for is, when we do the feasibility study for Suitland High School, we'll also look at Drew Freeman, so that we're planning for the campus as a whole, even if they're separate projects. Just we'll start informing ourselves and working together with the community comprehensively.
Absolutely. And just a follow-up to that just came to my mind. When the board took action to delay the boundary changes, did that impact the projected impact, the budgetary impact on the feasibility study for Drew Freeman and Benjamin Stoddard Middle School, or all of our schools that would have been impacted? Would that push their funding timelines back a year if we delayed our boundary vote?
No.
Okay. I know there was some concern from my constituents that, you know, with the boundary changes and the grade restructuring, that Drew Freeman would get a lot more students and it would bump up their enrollment numbers, and that would have put them on a higher priority. Is that not true?
Well, understanding the boundaries, the intended boundaries, helps us to have clarity as we plan. So it would be helpful to know what those boundaries would be sooner rather than later.
Okay, perfect. And one last thing, as I indicated before the meeting, Benjamin Stoddard is listed in District 4, and it is in District 7.
We'll make that correction.
Thank you.
I see no further questions or discussion. Thank you, colleagues, for that great discussion. That concludes our CIP discussion. My agenda says there's no follow-up items, but I think Dr. Maxwell might have a follow-up item that we need to bring to our attention.
Yes, sir, I do. Thank you for remembering that. I appreciate it. So this is Sarah's last meeting, and I wanted to put a little context for the board to her service to our district. I will tell you that when I first returned to the district in 2013, this district was known for, on occasion, returning millions of dollars because it hadn't been able to perform work that was, money was raised through bonding authority and other mechanisms to do, and there was a real concern and a real issue at the state level and at the county level about our management of our capital Programs Office. If you attended in those days, which I did not, but I attended as a representative of another district in those days, Prince George's County was raked over the coals, I think is fair, in some of those meetings about how it was functioning and the work that it was doing. In the 3 years that Sarah Woodhead and I have worked together, and the rest of her team as well, I should acknowledge them, the reputation of the Prince George's County Public School System has improved tremendously. When she comes to you and presents to you an integrated program that includes a long-term facilities master plan, a maintenance plan, a capital plan, you know, that is work that she has. I mean, you see her in this function. You don't always see her in that other role of making all of this fit together. And she has done an extraordinarily magnificent job for this school district. And I have told her this privately, but I will tell her publicly. I know a lot of people in this business across the state and across the country. And I don't know anyone that has functioned at the high-performing level that she has performed in the 3 years that we've had the opportunity to work together. So from my chair, she will be sorely, sorely missed. And I think from her team's chair, she will be sorely, sorely missed. And so they're small tokens of our appreciation, but I did want to present her with a plaque tonight for her distinguished service to our school system and for the great person that she is and how knowledgeable she is. And I, too, wish her extraordinary good luck in her next professional role, knowing that she will bring to them the high quality of professionalism, service, and intelligence and knowledge that she brings to the job. So I'd ask the board if they would join me, and if we could have a volunteer, because I know we don't have one of our professional photographers here, but I can text a picture to our communications people and, you know, that kind of stuff. But anyway, thank you, Sarah. Would the board join me? Oh, you can do it? You got it? Dwayne's coming through. There's a box with the thing that makes it stand up.
All right, thank you so much. I was reminded by, all right, ooh, yes. My crack staff reminded me that if I don't adjourn, we must stay here in perpetuity. So therefore, since we have no further business, this concludes the August 10th. You don't even have to vote. This concludes our CIP and FAB committee meeting. Thank you very much. Board members, I hope you stick around for another 30 minutes for the swearing in of our student board member at 7 p.m.